Mike the Architect. Do I have to go? Or is this Mike the Other Architect.com?
I don't think I need the mic. Do we?
Andy, are you ready?
Nah, you're good.
You're not feeling intimidated?
All right. Welcome. I'm Ramesh Ganesh. I work at Starbucks. Newest member of the ISA Puget Sound boat. I was not prepared to do the MC, but Travis, who usually does the MC, is sick, and I was going to come by, socialize, talk, and then take off. I'm going to New York and DC tomorrow. It's my vacation. So then I get 2 o'clock. I'm trying to wrap up everything at work, and then I get this email from Travis saying, "Tom and Ramesh, I'm sick. I can't come, but go ahead and have the event." I think we are already planned for the mock boat. Thank you for doing this. This will be really good. I want to learn. And first time we're going to record the event so that we can have it for the others who can't make it, like Travis. So,
Trust me, Travis knows how that works.
So I'll go through quickly what we do for the, as the chapter here, and then start with the boat, mock boat. We'll break for dinner. Barbecue dinner is on its way. That's why Tom just left the room. And then we'll do the boat with Scott. We'll do a panel talking about architecture. So, how many of you is new, like the first meeting? All right, we got half. That's really good. So we had one earlier this year at Starbucks. That's how I got involved. There was a good turnout. It was a better day, I think, like a rainy day, so people came in for a Seattle evening. So ISA is a non-profit. It started as International Architect for Software Association, I think. Now it's global. We are trying to chapter it as Global Architects. It's a non-profit association, enterprise, information, infrastructure, software, and business architect. Those are the pillars. If Paul was here, that's what he would say. It's the pillars of architecture. It primarily has a knowledge base. All of the repositories are there, all the information. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to go to the website. Each chapter has its own site, and then we have a global site with all the information. And then what is there now? It all started about 10 years ago. Paul, I think some of you here were the founding members were done there. 60,000 professional network, 60,000 people going strong, 8,000 registered members, paying registered members. And then we have 3 types of certifications: the knowledge-based exam, the association, the application-based practical exam, and then CITAP. That's the one which we're going to try mock boat today. So over 2,000 have been certified so far. So it's there. And then we have courses which they come out and teach. I think Scott here is currently doing one, the core architect. There. And we have 10 curriculums, like published curriculums. And then companies like Dell, Microsoft, many more, we do courses for them, specialized courses. Any questions so far, like on the chapter or where we are? As I already mentioned, it's a repository. It's a lot of repository in there. And then we have 35 chapters and 30 countries. So local leadership is Travis, who couldn't make it. Then Tom, Tom. Tom is the other president. And then we have myself. Some of the benefits I just went through. It's primarily the resources that you have, right? Lots of documents. Every document you can find, it's in there, you can search. When I went through building up the architecture practice, I used this a lot at Starbucks. A lot of things that we would get from Gartner or Forrester. It's more practical, like what people have done before. Papers in there are really useful. And then the knowledge of the 5 pillars that I mentioned, and an explanation of it. And then we have different courses that go through each of those pillars. And then connections, the online community, we have a Twitter, we have Facebook, and the monthly newsletters that comes out through email. That's what. And then benefits, you get trainings, you get, I think a lot of you have gone through some kind of training. I know when I was talking to people, they are attending one this week. Training is a major benefit. You can go to the URL and get more details, like what are the different, they have both types of in-person training as well as online training. And then we get discounts for the seminars and conferences. The big one coming up is in December. We have a 2-day event. I've not been to it, but ask any of the founding members, Andy or Anna, they'll tell you it's very useful. It's one of those big conferences where you get C-level participant and different topics around architecture. And then for locally, we have this event every quarter. That's our plan. And then we are going to have more of like a paid event like what we have in the conference. That's our future. Probably in 2013, we want to have one here in Seattle also, but it all depends on how much we can get people to get involved. Having said that, I want to be able to get more board members, more members who can be helping us with Tom, myself, and Travis. So we are looking for volunteers. Contact me or Tom today or email us if you want to be actively participating. We want to make this meeting more frequent. I know there's more people who want to get involved, but then we all have full-time jobs. Like we said, today I was stuck in traffic when I from Seattle. So I want to encourage you, reach out to me or Tom. We can get you in some position in there so that you can also be part of it, part of this community. The last one, we want to thank sponsors. Blue Roaster, no, is Kevin. Kevin is not here, right? Tom? Kevin is not here, but Colin. Oh, hey Colin. Thank you. They have been a really good sponsor for us. They sponsored our event at Starbucks earlier in the year in February, and then they're again an event sponsor here. So 509 is the wine. If you have not tasted the wine, is really good. So on that note, we're going to have the next event at their place, October 3rd, right? 4th. October 4th, we're going to have the event there. We'll finalize the time and then let you know. It is going to be consumerization of IT topic is going to be talk. And then last, Microsoft, this building, and all of you here, most of you are here. Microsoft has been also really nice, giving us space, and wherever we need help. Thank you. Okay. With that, we can start with the mock vote. Andy?
Great. Well, I want to give a little bit of context to this before we started, just to make sure you know what's going on with it. This is a CITAP certification, and it's a board-level review. We're not looking for trivial pursuit to make sure that you know all of the Zachman framework or anything. What we're trying to do with this is to validate your experience using the best practices that we define in the pillars of that are described for this certification. There are 5 foundation and then 1 specialization that you've got. So that is what the board's doing. This is not getting 4 people together and saying, hey, can you listen to this person talk and ask them a few questions. There's a lot of rigor around this. When we first developed the program, we had a psychometrician, which is a human measurement statistician, work on this to describe the level of skill, and they worked very hard on the doctorate programs for a couple of universities, and they worked on the getting a law degree, getting through the board. And they brought their experience to creating the board. So what we do with it is the candidate has a number of documents that they provide to give the board members context. They read that in advance, and it's very specific what we're looking for. We're not looking for, do you know the definition of this term? We're looking for, how have you used this? When have you used this? What's your opinion of it? So we're looking for that out of that document. We're looking for a resume or a CV, so we have a good idea of what your breadth of skill is overall. And then we're looking for 3 projects. We're looking for your first project where you would say you were an architect, so we know that demarcation. We're looking for your worst one, because if you haven't failed, you're not an architect. So we're looking for that, not to laugh at you. We're looking at it to identify how you learn from your mistakes and make sure that you don't repeat them. And then we're looking for the one you're most proud of to get an idea of how big you've grown your skills. When the board asks questions, they want to get down to the bottom of what you know. So they're going to pinpoint, and they're going to ask very direct questions. Once they understand where your limits are, then they back off in that area. So they might ask you a very specific question, and when you say, I don't know, or I can't answer that, they'll move off of that and move somewhere else. If you don't understand a question, then the board member will say, I don't understand, and or the candidate will, and the board member will rephrase it. Now the board members don't just come in off the street. They get training on how to ask effective and precision questions. There are different levels of questions that are tied to Bloom's taxonomy, and they learn how to ask questions at the synthesis level as opposed to the knowledge level. So they don't ask yes/no questions. They ask, what's your opinion of, or how do you make a selection between this or that? Or tell me about a time when you, and they're looking for some kind of experience. And they cut you off, they keep a very fast pace, they're looking to hit a broad set of skills and validate it. So that's the approach that they take overall with this. They have a number of tools that we've created for them so that they can look at each one of the skills and they'll mark down, oh, I think I've seen enough of this, I need to look in that area. What ends up happening is 10 minutes after you started talking, they know whether you are at the bar or not, and then they're validating it from then on, and they're trying to collect the evidence they need and trying to find out where your areas are that you can improve in so that they can give you relative and relevant feedback that says, if you do this, you're going to take your game up to the next level. Now, filling out the documentation is going to make you such a better architect. Just filling it out, if you do nothing else, is going to make you so much better because you have to look at your skills and say, oh, I don't know this. And then you go and you look at it, you research it a bit, you talk to someone that does know it, and you grow your skills overall. And then when you're on the board, if you ever get the opportunity to do that, that really increases your skill, because these people that are on the board, it wears them out. They've worked extremely hard, and they have got to know a subject very well. They don't always know everything that the individual does, but between the four of them, they know a lot more than the individual does. So they always come out learning something, and in order to ask effective questions, they grow their skills tremendously. And you can talk to each one of them, and they'll tell you that very same thing. So that's what we do with this certification. If you achieve it, it is a tremendous high watermark for you in your career. The people that I see get the certification, they walk taller, and they feel authoritative because they've been vetted and validated by their peers, by a community. So and every one of them that I see that gets a certification, they start knowing that they're good, and they start sharing that with the people that they mentor. It's amazing to see that growth that they have. So with that, we're going to go.
Could you cover what we're going to be looking for, the 5 pillars?
We are looking for the 5 pillars. Show of hands, how many people have looked at those with ISA? Okay, so you know what those are. We're looking for a couple of different things. We're looking for design skills, and that is, well, first we look for business technology strategy skills, and that is, how do you go into a room and talk to someone that says, I need this, and make sure that you know what they need, that it's going to satisfy the business problem that they've got, and that it's going to be of business value to them. It's going to provide that impact. And that's what the business technology pillar is all about. It talks about how you do those things. Once you've done that and you've captured that information, which is a lot more than a business analyst can do, and we can talk about that anytime you want. Once you've done that, then you've got to be able to design a solution. And designing a solution, you've got to put your biases aside. We all have technologies that we like and approaches that we like, and we always use that to fix the same problem without even thinking about whether that's the right thing to do. So what we do with design is we use modeling, and we say, why are we doing this? Why do we need this? Why do we need this? We've done it this way 10 years. Do we really need to do that? And we use modeling to look at different approaches to a solution, and then identify the best one by tying it to the business need, balancing it with the complexity of it, and figuring out what is going to be able to be delivered in the environment in the time that it's going to be.
Well, also that you can explain after the vote. I think that we need to see it first, and then we can go into the
Okay.
There's a candidate talking?
Dude, what?
Yeah, and
Snap! What candidate, what can you have?
I don't see a candidate.
the boards are absolutely serious. We run a very tight ship. When they come in, we have a timer. We talk about what they're going to do. We make it very clear, and it is all business. And the board members, if they stray from that, then the person that's doing the moderating has a big stick, and they beat them real hard with it. And they try and make the candidates somewhat comfortable. So with that, we're going to start. And you're doing a 20-minute presentation, and then we're going to do 10 minutes of Q&A with each of the board members. Normally what we do is a 30-minute presentation, and then 2 rounds of 10 minutes of Q&A with each of the board members. But this will give you a little bit of a feel for what it's like. Neha, go ahead. Good luck.
They should need to introduce themselves first.
Okay, we'll start with that. We start with a round of introductions. We're going to start with the board members. We're going to go around the room, and we're going to end with you. When you start your introduction, I'll start the countdown timer, and you'll have 20 minutes to complete your introduction and presentation. Then we'll do 10 minutes of Q&A with each of the board members, and we'll take a 5-minute break and ask you to leave the room. Then you'll come back and do another 10 minutes of Q&A, and then you'll have 5 minutes if you'd like to make any closing remarks. And that's it. So my name is Andy Ruth. I'm the timekeeper and moderator. You can ignore me.
My name is Michael Maher. I'm an infrastructure architect, and I'm on your board.
Jim Welch, I'm a solutions architect, and I'm on your board.
Richard Webb, infrastructure architect.
Andrea Seaford, information architect.
We have solution architects.
Thank you for the time today. I will briefly take you through the project that I did a couple of years ago, which I hope will stand here as a basis on what we can discuss later about my proficiency in the architecture. The organization I will talk about today, and because we are recording, actually I hit the name, specific name of the organization, is a huge telco. And the telco had a very, very bold vision when I was employed by them. And from perspective of idea to create a new type of the environment which is actually coming out from the business drivers of getting the latest and greatest technology into their own environment that they can absorb, learn, and actually then resell through to their own customers. That was one of the most compelling business drivers and business arguments, actually how to take their strategic business goals towards the technical implementation. The goal of the project that I will talk about today, the architectural goal that we had, was mostly around designing, but also deploying the environment that kind of on one side fit straight into the production environment, but at the same time was isolated enough and kind of decoupled enough that in case that anything new in that new untested environment went wrong, that the production itself wouldn't and couldn't see. But let me take you first back. So we are talking about the telco industry, and the landscape of that industry is rather specific compared to all of the other industries. On one side, telcos as an industry are going through a rough time from perspective that one era is over for them. Telcos as an industry are going from offering some very complete, very rich, very kind of a user-focused set of services, which they used to do through telephony and all of that market, going through an era where the fixed line dialing and actually even offering internet, this is all becoming an infrastructure that can be overshadowed and can actually be completely bypassed with a billing on the side and actually offering all of the new modern internet services on the side, where telcos can't play the similar role that they used to play 10, 15, 20 years ago. Every telco this year is talking about the quadruple play, and the same was for this telco where I was employed as an enterprise strategy consultant. Of course, we are talking about the fixed line telephony, we're talking about the TV, about the internet providing, and about mobility. But also, if you're looking into this market, most of the telcos want to go into the system integration space as well, to kind of collaboratively build something new and modern together with their either top customers or broad base of customers, so they can either sell to or sell through. On the other hand, if you're looking to my specific telco, and in my slide deck, again, the name of the telco I worked for, I changed for the telco in italics. They were at that time, they still are, the absolute market leader in that country with a very, very positive image. And they just wanted to essentially keep and prevail that image of being altruistic do-gooder for the rest of the company, because they were at the same time the monopolist as well. And they acquired the largest system integrator not more than a year ago, before that project started. Most of the telcos are doing that. If you're looking in Germany, for example, the Deutsche Telekom acquired the T-Systems. If you're looking outside US, majority of the telcos will always try to build and create additional system integration arm. The telco that I worked for at that time as a Microsoft enterprise strategy consultant had additional issue because they were outsourced before they acquired a system integrator. So bringing external system integrator in while being outsourced to a company that would probably rather see dead rats than Microsoft in a data center was a very interesting tension. So system integrator was extremely Microsoft friendly, but had no access to the data center, while the outsourcing partner that managed the telco had all of the access and essentially kind of a partial ownership of the data center, but absolutely did not want to see Microsoft technology anywhere close. That was that major advantage that brought in the third type of a party, and that was Microsoft Consulting, to kind of try to be an arbiter and play in that human dynamic scheme in between. Just to wrap up on the landscape, if you're looking from market size perspective, System integration and actually offering those things is relatively small compared to all of the other things, the fixed calling, the IP data, the mobile. But if you're looking into the growth, what they saw and projected, and actually those projections a year later were very much true, you can see that IT services from telco were by far the most relevant and important factor of all. And that was one of the reasons why that business opportunity essentially came very, very clear on the top agenda of the CIO. So we did sit together, the whole team, it wasn't just me, but the whole team from the account manager and a couple of architects from Microsoft and a whole bunch of the technical specialists as well, and essentially said, if you want to move from a traditional infrastructure-centric to a customer-centric telco, there are a couple of things that we need to do and there are a couple of things that we need to deliver. And also from perspective of changing the strategic imperatives, which we already worked with the enterprise architecture team, and they had a very strong, very large EA team within the telco. They really wanted to become the leading technology provider of the market. Not just the leading infrastructure provider, but actually start offering a very complex system integration services as well. So in order to do that, they wanted to actually be the first and best in those new technology waves and try to understand how actually extract the business value out from them. And the last one was that Microsoft was just on the brink, just like right now as well, just on the brink of bringing the next wave of technologies out, which is creating expressive pressure to all of the different constituencies on the market, from large enterprises, which kind of start to fear how they will deploy the new stuff, all the way to system integrators and partners, independent software vendors, and so on and so on. So that whole chain of dependency, which every telco can very much feel, was in the anticipation, what will that new technology wave create for them? So, as I said, telco was by far the largest player in this game, particularly because they bought the system integrator, and it is in this picture included in the large circle. The outsourcer, the company that did not really like Microsoft, was extremely relevant and important player. Think in your head something like IBM Global Service. It wasn't IBM GS, but something like that. So extremely important player with their own processes, their own change control, their own way of working the things out. And if we would follow their processes, we would never ever finish in time when the new technology wave hit. And of course there was a tiny little small Microsoft trying to be like a third party and arbiter in there. The circles that you see are essentially the roles that I directly either played or influenced on the project. So I was definitely part of the strategy team for telco, and that was my primary salary, primary source of me being in the company, and actually that I was part of the project came from that I was an enterprise strategy consultant. I daily worked with the operations team, and essentially I had the enterprise admin rights on the whole telco environment from the operations perspective. From perspective of the big outsourcing company, I worked through them and with them, and I knew most of the project team. I was lucky enough to actually handpick the people who were part of that next gen project, and also worked with the tier 2 and tier 3 support teams. From a Microsoft side, I was not part of the account team. I essentially got the project given, which account team negotiated. Also the pricing, the scoping, the sizing, although I partially influenced, that didn't come from me. Actually, it was a little bit out from the bounds that I would be happy with. But I was definitely part of the consulting and services team. So if you're looking specific what my role was how it was defined in the charter, I had two major hats. I was the solution architect from perspective of the telco, but I was also enterprise strategy consultant from perspective of Microsoft. So I tried to defend the interests of the company as well as interests of Microsoft. And that's why those two roles sometimes had the divergence, sometimes they aligned well together, but I really needed to be very clear when I was talking in the interest of telco and when I was talking in the interest of Microsoft. From perspective of leadership, well actually, because I'm getting 10 minutes less, I'll skip through a couple of things. Let me guide you through the sample requirements that we did. And I put here 3 sample business requirements, 3 sample functional, and 3 sample technical requirements. we were extremely clear what the differences between them are and who gets, as a stakeholder, who gets business requirements and whom do we do the first exploration, do the analysis, do the priorities of business, of functional, and of technical requirements. All of those documents actually, once we got them, because it was a politically highly charged environment, we also introduced a couple of new things in there. One was essentially a dashboard of being able to track the fulfillment of requirements, particularly for the top level management, to essentially have that kind of the executive level oversight of which requirements are we getting green or yellow or red. And on the other hand, we also created the knowledge management repository. So whenever we hit any major problem on a project, that we were able to go back to the documentation that everyone was able to see and say, well, this is what you signed on, this is what we all agreed on, and that's why we need to have a certain feature implemented on it. At that time, we didn't call quality attributes quality attributes. We called them still the non-functional requirements or systemic requirements. We created a very, very well-balanced trade-off matrix. Which of them are critical, which of them are important, and so on and so on. We created a very, very well-established list of, if things don't go down the plan that we thought they should go, which quality attributes are waiting on the decision, are we going left or right, and how are we going around each roadblock which we hit. Let me show you a couple of designs that we did. The first, on a conceptual level, from an infrastructure perspective, as you know, patterns in infrastructure are rather unique. So for example, having a pattern that properly separates the administration from the user, from the service desk, for example. The pattern of a separation of the concerns is one of those that we try to clearly separate. The telco had an extremely IT-savvy workforce. So in order to tell to someone what they can or can't do in that new playground, which was essentially for most of those employees, the next-gen environment was a very nice new playground because they could raise any type of the modern servers, any type of a next-generation Exchange, next-generation SharePoint, essentially everything was available. How do you keep them from spawning it on their own? So not being an operations, but still being enabled and empowered as a very strong technical leadership. So that's how we created that flow, going from the development environment to dev test environment, so going to the next-gen environment, which was then attached, but again, decoupled and firewalled with the production environment. Number one, for me as an infrastructure architect, number one tenet was there is no manual install. Everything that we manually installed in dev, we needed to have a full automation of installation or installation in dev tests, and then again, completely scripted and automatic going into the next-gen environment. There was no manual book, how do you restore, how do you recover, anything like that, which was kind of a very new, particular for the outsourcer, because they were very much used to have the manual books of click here and open that wizard and go through and so on and so on. From a logical perspective, we embedded, the yellow part is what we embedded into the production. The production environment was there and had multiple DMZs and so on and so on. So if we wanted to add those new things in there, from the smartphones which connect to the mail, to the external laptops and playing with all the next generation VPNs and so on, essentially we had to touch every single infrastructure zone within the telco. So we added quite some of the service into the internal zone, both on the server side as well as on the desktop. Huge amount of stuff into the different types of the DMZ zones, and definitely new devices on the internet. And if you're looking into the physical design, into the implementation, one of the big issues our team has was that we didn't have any direct access to the data center. We simply couldn't enter it because of all of the regulations and procedural controls. So very much we felt probably the same way like the operators of the Mars rovers are feeling these days. So essentially you programmed some morons that tried to execute that stuff in a time-shifted manner within a data center. So we needed to collect and gather all of the information, all of the designs, how the data center looks like. So we were able to say, you need to go to the drawer C27 in the rack 5, and that's what you do on a server there. We created a complete set of the productional new network designs, and essentially, how do you route the networks through the corporate switches, so you still reuse the equipment, but you isolate the network flow. And of course, from the networking, from the machinery perspective, again, one of the patterns that we used, every machine was the same. So essentially forcing to kind of industrialize production style of, we don't care do you need a big server or small server, everything gets the same server, and you can then flip-flop the servers, you can swap them easily, you can migrate and move the things from server to server. A virtualization at that time, at that telco, was not very big. They were not too keen on it because they had one wave of the VMware going in, and they actually were burned dramatically. So most of our server installations were a straight metal installation, not virtual installation. Going through what we created at the end, if you're looking on a high level, we essentially created a service-based type of the environment. We offered services in the identity, in messaging, and so a whole bunch of the services which went out almost like a Chinese menu list. And people started to pick off what they want. How do they want to? Do they want to go to the next generation email? Do they want to go to the next generation Active Directory? And so on and so on. And we were able to switch service from the old to the new environment nearly seamlessly. So, from a project management, technical project management perspective, we followed the methodology of telecom. And I'll go through a couple of those big phases. The green things, my team was directly responsible for. The red things we were dependent on. And then we have those black cases which were kind of flying completely independently. But if you're looking into the project management methodology of that telco, we went from the concept phase, through the initiation, through the requirements and design, through the building implementation, and at the end we went through the closeout. Very heavy type of the waterfall methodology. We tried to be a little bit agile within those milestones, so kind of it became a little bit of a hybrid, but still, milestones were preset, predefined, deliverables per milestone were preset and predefined. And within a milestone, we kind of ran, at that time Scrum wasn't very popular, but if you would ask me what was it, how we ran the project, it was kind of a hybrid, within a milestone was a hybrid between Microsoft Solutions Framework and Scrum as a project management method. What did we rely on? Because this is telco, most of the telcos are working either on NEOS and or ETOM frameworks, which are both coming from a TM forum. Essentially, most of the telcos have created, they are all members of the forum which created kind of a telco in a box framework. As long as you follow it, closer you follow it, less you have to think how the telco needs to be done. And oddly enough, if you're now looking forward, most of the most of the cloud operators are following the ETOM just as well. We also follow their own EA framework, which was actually very, very heavy and useless from our perspective because we wanted to be way more nimble and agile. Very frequently, Microsoft products don't fit into the predefined box of the enterprise architecture. We need a box to do messaging transfer here, and then you bring a Microsoft product with just 6, 7 more things together. So we had a problem with that as well. Definitely followed ITIL, which was there in-house, particularly from an outsourcer perspective. From a project management perspective, you saw before, we followed the TDOM, and definitely my background as well in project management, we followed the various principles of PMBOK from Project Management Institute. From security perspective, we followed huge amount, especially telco is highly regulated from a security perspective, and government demands that you go through many of security verifications and control in order to do that. In 45 seconds, I'll not drive you too much through the risk, but both risk management and change management were probably way, way more heavy duty than any average IT project can do. And from the perspective of results and lessons, definitely we deployed it on time within budget. And again, I can't expose numbers right here because we are in a public forum. From my lessons learned, essentially, I found out if you want to to stall the initiative. If you want to politically stop something, you bring more stakeholders. And essentially that's what the outsourcer was doing, bringing more and more people, and more they brought in, more and more verifiers, slower and slower it went. But at the end, we were able to
Thank you, Miha. What I'll ask you to do is spend 5 minutes on the presentation and 5 minutes on a pillar, and you can pick it as you go. All right?
Okay, so by 5 minutes on the presentation, you mean?
Ask questions about this, and then get very specific
But it's your
about
time.
a
Oh, I should have
pillar.
told that.
All right?
Okay. I guess I'll go first. Sorry, I'm arranging my thoughts. So, as part of the components of the solution that you deployed, speaking specifically about this, how did you go and justify or provide valuation for each of those various components, or the overall solution, or the total solution?
Justification happened for us on the requirements level. So at the beginning of a project, when we went through the requirements discovery and then analysis, that was essentially linked back to the business case and business value for the telco.
So deploying AD as the next gen Core 1 AD.
So some of the services were underlying dependencies. So very much we had the complete traceability matrix. Active Directory has no immediate value, but you can't deploy the next Exchange without the Active Directory. So there is dependency. We have to have this one with no value in order to give you this one with the value.
So stepping outside of the program, how then could you potentially how could you assign a valuation to, say, next generation Exchange?
The Exchange itself as a value increases the communication flow, adds additional features, allows you to actually get much more integrated signals of who is...
So that's product-specific stuff. I'm a CFO. What do I care about?
From CFO perspective, I can either talk to you about reducing the cost of management in a data center if you care about it, okay. But in this case, it was much more about increased productivity and image. Okay. Even CFO cares about the image of the company.
Absolutely. So then how would you then go and translate the receiving? What tools could you use to go and quantify the value received?
Well, in telco's case, they had their own specific accountant type of tools. What I would do is net present value is the most simple type of a quantification tool that you can use. Project specific would be return on investment if you really care about it. But there are quite some of the tools that you can go. Even the ATEM would do the very good evaluation of the...
Okay, that works. Can't read my handwriting. You talked about you talked about the relationships between the three parties. There's Microsoft, the outsourcer, and the actual telco. What kind of how did you handle the challenges that occurred between the clashes of those different entities?
Luckily, I wasn't the one that was, at least at the beginning, visible as the essentially attack vector person. That was somebody in our account team. So most of the progress that we did with my team was when we were doing a subvertive type of the communication. So nobody really expected that most of the work will actually happen from the team where I was. And that's why huge amount of coffees, huge amount of side meetings, huge amount of kind of a little naive emails where essentially those two parties were so entrenched that when somebody naively came from the third side, they both were expecting attacks from each other. And that's why we were able to kind of find the middle ground, because we were the third disinterested party in this case.
Okay. So how did you handle, so I guess from a communication standpoint, you said that you would go and send out naive little emails and whatnot. What messages would you go and, I guess kind of walk me through that process. How would you go and say, break a conflict? And how could you go and facilitate that through your communication steps?
Good question. So we never tried to make a conflict in the first case. So, before having a meeting for the decision was already made. I already made everything sure that whoever was the best person to talk to one stakeholder, explain to the stakeholder where we are going, what we need to do, what are the alternatives. Same with, I did, for example, I was much more on the outsourcer side than on the telco side. So I kind of handled that relationship. When the meeting happened for the decision, the decision was already done. We just had, the parties in the room didn't know. This is one of the typical, I'm East European, this is a typical East European technique that how you don't cause the war when you bring people to the table. And probably this was actually one of the reasons that I was brought to this country and to this customer out from the Eastern Europe. Because this was my first project after I left Eastern Europe.
Okay. So kind of stepping outside of this project, how would you, let's say that you had a couple of architects on your team that were having a squabble, how would you go and address that?
Having a proper political communication is not something that you can teach a team. It's something that you either did in the past or you shouldn't do it in this project. So very much how I would do it, based on your question, I would rather go and select people that I can either through the interviewing or working with them in the past, I would know that they are capable of diffusing politically charged situations.
So Jim and I are on your team, and I say red, Jim says blue, and neither of us will give an inch. How could you go and work with us, being our leader, to go and resolve the challenges?
Well, there are a couple of options. If you two are not on the same level, by both towards me and with each other, probably I will pick the side and I will tell to the other to shut up, because you are in my team. So as long as I'm looking the way that the results needs to be achieved, sometimes you need to go and actually have a hardline command and control function, which is typical in every military. On the other hand, if we are kind of a much more in a softer relationship, you go through several, so there are many techniques. First one is trying to find a middle ground. Second one is trying to understand, is there any hidden or covert reason why one would disagree with the other. One would be, if I don't care, is it red or white? Actually, I really need to understand why do you have the extreme opinions, and as you said, you can't agree. The worst case, it's always to remove one and actually replace with another person. But you need to give me more details to give you a specific outcome. There are many techniques for that.
Okay. How do you mentor junior resources?
Mentoring and coaching are two different things. Are you asking for coaching or mentoring?
How about we'll hit mentoring first, then we'll go back to coaching.
Mentoring means that what you want to do strategically in a longer term. And it's mostly listening, trying to give a very minimal advice at the right time. You can't just dump your wisdom on a person because they will not be able to swallow it. And you need to have those contacts frequently in the longer term. Coaching is kind of a partially shadowing, seeing what I'm doing, explaining why I'm doing something, how I'm doing it, trying to give you a little bit of the work, monitoring how you do it, trying to give you a feedback and so on. So it's coaching is way more tactical, mentoring is way more strategic. And I think I'm doing both for different people.
How do you practice knowledge management in your day-to-day life?
Knowledge management is two things. One is actually capturing the tacit and explicit knowledge, and the other one is using it. So I'm practicing it personally both by trying to push into the knowledge vault most of the useful things that I do, push them in a vault from perspective that it can be found, but also whenever I need to do something new, make sure that I'm not doing something from a scratch that somebody else already somewhere else on the planet did. So do extensive amount of combing and scraping through our internal knowledge or all of the knowledge bases, also going for the tacit knowledge, asking you, asking Jim, asking, hey, did you ever hear that anyone would do something before? All of those are elements of knowledge management.
So how do you prevent knowledge from becoming stale?
Tacit knowledge becomes stale, explicit knowledge becomes stale. The moment when you codify it and you drop it somewhere, it will start getting stale. My focus is on a tacit knowledge. Knowledge in heads is rarely getting stale. So even when I find a document, it doesn't matter, let's say it's from 2007, but it's authored by you. Yes, I will read the document, but that's not the only thing I will do. I will contact you and go, hey, Mike, I saw the document. Can you tell me what changed from that perspective? So never rely on the explicit knowledge. Always try to find the tacit knowledge of the person that codified it.
Okay. When you're talking, so you're an infrastructure architect, when you're speaking to, say, an information architect, what are the areas, how do you relate to that person in that role?
So I need to understand, if you're an information architect, your concerns are mostly about information structure, data structure, storage, and so on, and I need to adjust and modify my language that actually addresses the concerns that you have. So information architect, I will mostly, from perspective of infrastructure, I will mostly talk about how do I care about the data at rest? How do I care about the data at flow? So most of the information architects also care about discoverability. They care about how the indexing, will we be able to index the stuff? How will we connect the non-structured data, let's say emails, with the structured data, let's say SharePoint? And these are the different themes that I would like to find and then structure the conversation, because I need to get something out from the discussion as well, as an infrastructure.
Okay, and I'm almost out of time, so.
Okay, and I wanted just 10 seconds, but we'll continue. The question I have to begin with is, I want to make sure that I misunderstand it, I'm not hear you. Are you going with solution or infrastructure?
Infrastructure.
Okay, I thought you said solution. I'm
so sorry.
That's right. I want to understand a little bit about, and thank you for the presentation. What is the audience of the artifacts that you produced this for?
The presentation
Yes.
or my documents?
I haven't seen the documents, so I'm just going only what I see in the presentation. So the artifacts in the presentation, I assume, are used for an audience at the customer. Is that a true statement?
This presentation was created specifically for this board.
Okay. So are those the artifacts that you would share typically with a peer architect?
No, this slide deck, the way how it's structured, no.
Okay. Why did you present that to us then?
Because after I went through the studying of the material for this certification, I know all of the pillars and all of the competencies I need to cover, and I try to staff them all within...
Okay, I'm going to cut you off sometimes, and it's not personal. We're going down the right way, or I need to rephrase the question, so don't take it personally, but you will, but try not to. Okay? I understand where you're going. I'll get back to this when we talk about stakeholders in just a second. Tell me the strategy of the telco. What is the telco strategy? Now, you had two slides that alluded to strategy, but in your own words, what was their strategy? And I want to be very specific. How did they intend to make more revenue?
Strategically, telco wants to, first, specific telco I worked for, they wanted to stay the leader, perceived leader in the market. They wanted to sell to and sell through, so have kind of two types of the revenue streams. And they wanted, in a longer term, prevent, which actually they couldn't, prevent the breakup, the split up between the wholesale and the retail.
Okay. I'm going to jump around, by the way, and it's just, I'm in the schizophrenic where I just have a plan of, I don't know what I'm doing, but go to the board, and I want to talk about your stakeholders. I want you to draw out the stakeholder map that you had. And the reason I say that is you had friendlies and non-friendlies. I'm kind of curious who you reported to in the project, and dot line who you had influence over.
Let me leave that picture on the screen.
Perfect, that's where I started it, exactly.
So, literally, I will draw three interested parties. And within the party, let's say that this is Microsoft party, here is me.
Right.
I had my own stakeholders within Microsoft,
Exactly.
which, for the lack of the time, I will not draw too many.
Who were they, and were they friendly or hostile?
Well, I do have at least one hostile in here who actually hoped that telco will completely kick off the outsourcer here.
Okay.
And will give, so this is telco.
The question is, who was that person? Was it a peer, a superior, or a subordinate?
He was in a completely different group of Microsoft from perspective of his power. He was subordinate. From
Okay.
perspective of hierarchy,
That's fine.
he was my peer.
The persons that were your friends, were they peers or subordinates or
All three.
all three? Okay, perfect. Okay, so who was the influencers in the telco? I mean, obviously that's probably your major stakeholders, right?
Yep. At telco, so telco kind of splits to two parts, the system integrator and the traditional telco business. So there was the CIO, I talked to him, I had privilege to talk to the CIO about 3 times before that project because I was the enterprise strategy consultant.
Okay.
Then underneath this, there was a COO, I'm a very prestigious title, but essentially a person responsible for all the operations. Operations of all of the equipment. He was extreme Sun lover and now Oracle lover and so on. So this one was friendly, this one was kind of a neutral, although I think he was hostile. And then kind of there was a whole chain of the directors and GMs and so on, depending whom do we need to target. Here, I was able to influence the CEO, because I knew him from before. This system integration part...
Were you a dotted line to any of these people, or were you direct to these
So
people?
this one was reporting to the CIO of telco, the ex-CEO of the system integrator. He essentially became a general manager of a division.
Okay.
And this person, they wanted to do all of that job.
Okay,
So-
I'm going to cut you off because I want to get into other questions. Just the three main people at the outsourcer, and whether they were friendly or not.
Head of a help desk, head of operations,
Okay.
and head of security.
Okay, great. How was your security relationship?
Sorry?
How was the relationship with the security person?
Awesome, because I'm security trained.
Okay.
I was one of the few people that he
So
actually...
you could talk language, you ran trust with that
Correct.
person. Okay, that's good. I'm going to move on, but this is fine. We went
Thank
down
you.
where I wanted to go. Perfect. Okay, I want to take a jump back, if you will, at the diagrams that you showed, the conceptual design, logical design, implementations,
Yep.
things like that. When you talked about the conceptual design, you didn't mention any of the personas. You have users, and I have IT engineer. Did you do any persona studies? And can you
No.
tell me what you...
We didn't.
Okay, if you were to do it again today, would that be of any value to you today?
Probably I would start, if they would allow us, I would start dramatically different, because at the end, as you saw, we end up with services. So I wouldn't even start with personas. I would start with a much more generic service consumer type of a user stories. I would go much closer to the way
We'll go
how
down where I want to
agile...
go. We're going to move on. Perfect, thank you. So the next question I have then is, I want to talk a little bit about your methodologies and things like that. What was the systems that you built? Were they all out of box, or was there some customization that had to be done with them with developers?
None of them was out from the box, because none of them out from the box would fit.
Okay, so you had relationships with developing entities then, right?
No, so all of them were customized. None of them were custom coded.
Okay,
So all of that required extensive amount of scripting and modification on the customization level.
okay.
What
Tell me,
we as
in the design
infrastructure
process, how do you ensure that the scripting designs and things like that you're going to do, how do you ensure that they're going to go the direction you need them to go? Did you just write it and they went, or how did that work?
So yes, you do exactly that in the dev environment. But then you do extensive amount of quality testing, test-driven.
Tell me about that. Give me a story about your quality testing and how did you do that?
So the reason why we had the dev test environment is that anything that was kind of a made ad hoc and kind of a artisan manually scripted together in the dev environment was then properly codified in scripts and customization, installation, automation procedures, was given...
Okay, let me just go back. You're going down the right track, okay? I get where you're going. I'm sorry I'm cutting you off. That seems rude. I don't mean to be rude. Go back to the point where you're putting the ideas of the scripts together. Did you do any reviews of your designs? How would you have done that?
We had a part of the regular design reviews, which at the beginning of a project, when we were in that phase, they happened daily.
Okay.
Proposals were given to the team, they were debated, they were reviewed. Sometimes we didn't really know what they mean, because again, it's a new technology.
Okay, perfect. We're going down where I wanted to go. Okay. I want to talk a little about your systemic qualities, and I also want to talk about the other business requirements that you had as well. You can pick any of the slides. It's great that you've got them. Tell me about what... something's missing for me here, and that would be the measurables. How did you measure success of all of these?
We had all of the measurables documented in the papers, and if I would give you documentation in advance, you would see that in advance.
Okay.
But again, every single success factor always had a very specific measurable dimensions in there.
Okay, one of your business requirements was to have measurable SLAs. Tell me a little bit about what you meant by a measurable SLA.
So service level agreement that we wanted to have, and particularly it's important that it was measurable, because those guys were essentially on a way out. The outsourcer wanted to play the easy game, and we wanted to make sure that service level agreement that these need to provide to telco were very explicitly measurable. So if the environment is not available for X amount of seconds, first is, how do we know it is not available? So we had a specific system that is essentially measuring availability.
So you have a heartbeat of
Correct.
some sort.
Correct. And then in the SLA, we had a very specific penalties if these guys are not able
Who
to
pays
keep
those penalties?
outsourcer to telco.
Okay, perfect. Now, I want to go to the business requirements again. Can you go back to that one real quick?
Yep.
Again, tell me a little bit about how did you measure success of this entire solution? You talked about on time and on budget, right? I can talk to any CIO and they're pretty much going to tell me
It
you
comes
can be
very
on
much
time and on
down
budget
to
and still fail. So tell me how you
business
measure
success came down to a very simple factor. all the IT people in telco, both on the outsourcing side and within telco, are trained and prepared the moment when the next wave of all of the Microsoft technologies hits the market. So they understand the next SharePoint, they understand and use next.
Perfect. And in 20 seconds, because you're going down where I want to go, in 20 seconds, tell me how you can align the success of this solution with the business strategy.
Once you are perceived that you understand the next wave of technology, you are perceived as a market leader. As a market leader, you can also then keep the monopoly that you already have and essentially keep the trust that you know what you're doing despite it essentially being the single largest.
Normally, we would pound through another 20 minutes. Do all of you need to take a 5-minute break and get some water and go to the restroom? Then we're starting up in 5 minutes, and I mean...
And a lot of positioning and context setting. I'm not hearing or seeing a lot of architecture. In the last 40 minutes, I don't really get a sense of an architect. Okay, and this is a struggle because we're 40 minutes into the board and I don't have a lot of evidence. And I'm not seeing the rigor that's required for the level of the certificate. So I'd like to kind of start off with that point of view. I'd like you to kind of up your stance here. Drop the consultants, drop the project management, and really focus on the architectural side of the equation, because that's what we're here to certify. Okay. So in looking at this, what do you believe this certification implies to the business?
It helps to discern between the non-mastery in the architecture and the architect that actually has the rigor and the discipline to do consistent, high-value project with very low risk.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the discipline aspect again, because I'm not getting that in the previous discussion. So you said you met the CIO 3 times, and in your position you would have privilege to work with the CXO layer. So how did you formally and objectively extract strategy from that layer of the business?
I didn't.
How would you? Oh, the other thing I'd like you to point, we're going to focus on yourself and talk from yourself for what your practice is. Because we're measuring your practice,
Yep.
not the telco, you.
Yeah. I didn't because...
Well, how would you do it today? What would be the process you would go through?
I still wouldn't do it with executives because I wouldn't get enough time and face time with them.
So if you're going to speak the language of the business, which is a requirement of the certificate, and you're going to build an architecture based on business requirements, how do you know that your architecture will be sound or even valid without having a deep understanding of the true objectives of the business and having a way to validate that that is a true statement?
Because I would have the deep understanding of the business, which would mostly come either from various sources of documentation or people that are actually...
Okay, that's not my question. My question is, how would you vet that and how would you validate
question. The way how I would go through the validation is once I have a very clear proposed direction, I would use the moment either with executives or their immediate subordinates to actually... With executives, you don't get too much of a time, and very much you can ask very few questions, should we go left or right?
Is there any formal techniques that exist in the architectural community to do this type of work? Anything objective? Any type of techniques that exist outside of ad hoc interpersonal relationships, which is what I'm hearing a lot from you. If not, we'll move on. Let's move on to the next one.
Can you rephrase the question, please?
Okay, the question is there any formal techniques to extract strategy or validate
Can you rephrase
business?
that question, please?
Okay, okay, how do you, without using personal sentiment and personal, how can you make your practice objective at the business layer? Or how do you make it objective?
By establishing go, no-go gates with a properly documented traceability.
Okay, thank you, traceability, there you go, very good, thank you. Now, is there any formal traceability techniques in the industry that you're aware of or that you practice?
There are several. We use none of them on this.
I'm asking about you and your practice.
There are several. So ATEM would be...
Okay, fine, we'll just keep going then. So let's talk about this one here. What was the lowest person in the food chain that you interfaced with?
The frontline first level support guy.
Okay, what artifact from an architectural perspective did you hand that individual to make them successful in their job?
I gave him our logical design in order to explain to him what could, when users call in, what could go wrong and where to direct the incident.
That's perfect. Thank you very much. You talked about they had a bold vision. I didn't hear a bold vision. What is their bold vision?
Bold vision was to move from the infrastructure provider into a solution provider. That's very
Great.
bold.
So what did you change in your architecture to make that happen?
I didn't change my, I made the architecture so they would become a solution provider.
How did you know that your architecture was going to provide that bold vision to them?
Architecture of the next gen was on one side embedded into their infrastructure as an infrastructure provider, but on the other side it was open enough with all of the
Okay, that sounds great. Not interested. The fact that you buy really cool hardware and you put in next gen software and hardware, did that guarantee that their bold vision was going to
No,
come through?
no.
So my question is, how does your architecture, the actual craft of your work,
supported the vision?
Support and show that they could make that
Understood.
vision?
The most of the support to the telco vision came out from the knowledge transfer from us.
Knowledge transfer, beautiful. Okay. What formal techniques or objective techniques do you use for knowledge transfer?
Shadowing definitely would be one of them. The other one would be we actively push the various knowledge-based articles to them. We actively organize a couple of courses for
Okay, I'm good. Let's keep going. Now, did you do anything with ROI or any type of calculation to do any business value?
Not me personally, but somebody in our team did it, yes.
Do you do that in your practice?
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about this practice. So, in your work with this one, did you know the ROI number for this?
Well, we calculated the ROI number, which was, as always, with
You knew what it was, though, right?
Yes, yes.
Did
It
you
was
know?
it was over 200%, which from my perspective is outrageous.
So, what did you do with that inconsistency and that unethical behavior? Because you're just telling me as an architect you're
Correct.
unethical, and
I
I think the
kept quiet.
certificate is about something
Correct.
else.
I kept quiet.
Okay,
Because
so
that
what
ROI
is-
number wasn't the number
So
one selling point.
what is the difference between a staff architect and a certified architect to the business?
I know,
what-
I understand what you're alluring to. As a
I'm not worried,
certified
I'm saying
architect, I should raise my voice. I didn't see it as a flow large enough to actually
So in
scold.
today's world,
I
how
still
do you-
wouldn't do it.
if you do get a certificate here,
I still would not raise my voice.
because you're a consultant?
No, but because the ROI percentage in the industry is massively abused and is.
Is there any
common
other
practice.
numbers that are more accurate or more
Well, NPV
appropriate?
definitely would be much more accurate. Net present value.
Okay, and when does the business get value from an architecture? When is value realized?
I understand the question. It depends what type of the architecture. When it comes to the infrastructure, the value comes out from the things that you can start. You can extract the value from the infrastructure after actually you're starting to sell to or sell through the customers.
Okay, fine. And from an architect perspective, what is your role in validating or understanding?
Increase time to market.
But how do you know? I mean, do you go back and check? How do you know? Because don't you just move off the project? You've done your architecture, you move on. Do you have any responsibility to the business?
Yes, you do. On the closure of the project, you do the review of how was it, how did they think it will be done, how was it done, and at the end of the day, it comes to the satisfaction of the customer.
I'm going to argue with that. So let's say on this one, on January 5th, they were going to get 200% return on investment. You knew that was bullshit. So what happens when you measure and they don't get the ROI? What is the architect's responsibility at that point?
It depends if you are a staff architect or if you are externally
We're
hired
not
architect.
talking about staff, we're talking about certified. That's what you're here for,
A
right?
certified, are you still part of the cycle within operations when you start doing that?
How would you change your practice if you knew that the business did not achieve value from your architecture? What would you change?
I would definitely rate, if there would be no
How would
value,
you change your practice?
I would start communicating that.
Okay.
Because if you get no value, there is something
So you
tremendously wrong.
repeat failure over and over and then communicate failure?
No.
How would you turn that failure for your next project so that you're more successful?
Essentially, you need to capture what you learned on a past project. You patternize it. You put it into the pattern or anti-pattern if it was a bad pattern. And you
Are you liable as an architect for
sadly
the
not, but
failure
I should
of the
be.
ROI?
I should be, but I'm not.
Okay. You should be, but you're not.
I should. As every proper profession, we should be liable, but in IT,
Okay, so
we
put
are.
that aside. If there was a failure in a project in 17 seconds, what would you change to become repeatable and predictable on your next project?
I would capture what the failure was, and I would definitely try to avoid, if I would understand the root cause analysis.
Thank you, you got the last one.
Thank you very much.
Jesus Christ.
I'm going to be asking you some questions. I'm going to be abrupt at times and cut you off. It's because either I understand what you're trying to, where you're going, or I want to move on to the next question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the first thing that I'd like to ask you is, how fast did the telco, well, what was the original position in the market of this telco? And if you can't give me the exact number, you can tell me top, bottom, middle.
It was the only telco in the market.
Okay, so what is leading then, if it's the top, like how do you become the leading provider in a market of one?
The problem, as I said before, was there was a threat that the telco will be split apart. Plus, the exclusively mobile operators started to enter the market. Plus, exclusively
Okay, I'm going to ask
internet
you a little bit
providers.
more specifically. How does the risk of being split up change what they've done? Because then you would have a split of assets, correct?
Correct.
So why would they invest in this if the potential is that the assets will be split and potentially what you've worked on will go in with one side?
They wanted to show to the regulator that the split is not necessary. That they can still be. The reason for threat of splitting the company to parts was the lack of agility and lack of the leadership, the thought leadership. So they wanted to, among other things, this was not the only project trying to demonstrate that actually they can be the most agile, nimble, business-focused telco provider in the country.
So the goal really wasn't attached necessarily to an ROI.
No, it wasn't. That's why I didn't raise
We
the
didn't hear that early enough. I think that really was the goal that we needed to hear.
But as every project, we had to calculate the ROI because there was so much was on the stake. The ROI.
I understand that. That's what you're facing your customer with. I think it would have been more important to tell us what you were facing from an architectural perspective,
Understood.
because that gives us a lot more detail as to what you were actually trying to do here. And that's what we're here to talk about, because we're the architects also, and this is a pure conversation.
Yes.
Okay? Cool. All right, so now that I understand a little bit more about the relationship here and what was really trying to be achieved, were they successful or were they split up afterwards?
They were split up 3 years later.
Okay. Was the goal, after you've achieved this goal, was that an impasse? Did it help them to not get split up? Or was it sort of one domino that led to the others and eventually it was just another step?
It would be pretentious to think that only this project prevented it, but let's say that the demonstration that we showed through the thought leadership and all of that, the outsourcer left as the first one, so this part of the system integration took over all the infrastructure and so on, and then 2 years later they were split up. So I think that splitting up the company was inevitable, but our project, among many other projects, delayed or postponed that decision, which is probably, in a business term, important enough.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you something completely different now. Which is more challenging, managing strategy alignment with requirements and products through an integration, through outsourcing, and why? Was that clear enough?
No.
So what I want to know is, which one is more challenging when you're trying to manage the strategy against your requirements and the product? Is it going to be an outsource or is it an integration?
Oh, outsourcing. Outsourcing is a lose-lose proposition always. Outsourcer and the outsourcing company essentially create a lose-lose proposal from perspective that the service provided from outsourcing partner will be always the lowest common that the contract is still not breached, will be always the latest one and so on, and you will always be charged the highest possible amount of money that you can extract from the customer. So
I could challenge that, actually. I think that you could actually come up with the right, if let's say you use failure modes and effects analysis in order to actually build that contract, and you have a very strong contract where you have a lot of if this then that types of clauses, I think that you could actually get to a point where it's not the same situation.
I would be really interested to have that discussion. I didn't see a single outsourcing relationship where an outsourcer would be willing to sign a contract that you are proposing. But I didn't see all of them around the planet yet. What I saw is showing me that outsourcing propositions don't work.
Okay. Let's go to knowledge management. I know we've talked about it just a little bit. But one of the things that I was really interested in is exactly how did you, in this specific organization, from the beginning, did you have managed knowledge in the beginning, or was it tribal?
No managed knowledge.
Okay. How do you translate tribal knowledge into a managed system?
Tribal knowledge is what we call the tacit knowledge. It's within heads. Right. So all you really need to know is who knows what. So essentially you follow the network.
You're going to leave.
Yep.
And you're going to leave a system,
yep.
And you're gone, and it has to be supported.
Correct.
So how are you going to manage the knowledge that is no longer there? If you learned all this stuff from them, and maybe you're going to split up the company or whatever, somebody has to operate this thing when you're gone. How do you manage that knowledge?
So there are two different things. For operational part, definitely, we extracted and made a tacit amount of knowledge. Everything that is required to do the OLAs, to do an SLAs, to do the escalations, to do all of those things.
Isn't there more than that? There's code that has to be changed.
There should be more than that, and there wasn't. The reason why it wasn't is, in order to get more deeper in knowledge management, you need to change the KM culture. And this ecosystem couldn't change their culture. So that's why...
If you could do it over, what would you have done to govern knowledge?
Well, when you enter the engagement, you always assess what is the current culture, what's the maturity. And as you probably know, in a maturity scales, you can't jump. So very much you can strive to push for one step. So if you assess that they're on maturity level 1, you try to finish the project and push them on a maturity level 2. If they're on a 2 at the beginning, you go to the 3 and so on. You can't start with 1 and hope that you'll be on level 4 at the end of the engagement. That's unrealistic.
How do you evangelize a policy that you have identified as necessary, but has a lot of friction within the organization in this type of example?
Depending what necessary means. There was a policy, security policy.
Let's start with security policy. That's right.
In security policy, it's quite easy. You go through the fear modeling, which I call it a fear modeling. You try to paint the picture of, if we don't do that policy, how you can either cross-contaminate our zones, which we had, or...
I'm outsourced. I don't care. I just want to get my code checked in.
You go to the people that do care, and they do sign. You go to telco, and they then enforce to the outsourcer. So you need to follow...
How do you do it, though? Why do you have to have the telco come in? Why does mom have to tell me to behave?
I am going to those. I will go to those and say, you will be the hammer. I go to them and say, hammer will drop.
Is there a way that you can do this without having mom come to me?
Yes, it is. It depends what level of authority you are given.
Do you have to have authority? Isn't there another way?
Yeah, you need to have an influence.
Thank you. Okay. I just wanted to get that point there. Okay. Where did billing factor into this new solution?
No, this was internal solution, but it was designed in a way that metering, which you need first, and billing could be added later.
Okay. When you change from infrastructure to solution to a solution provider, how is the service transition to the customer or consumer?
Excuse me again?
Okay. When you mentioned earlier that you're changing from an infrastructure to being a solution provider. What does that look like, and how do you manage that with the end user, that customer?
Customer in telco world, telcos used to be solution providers.
Right.
And they slowly...
But in this case, that was an infrastructure.
Well, consumers shouldn't see much of a difference, because as a consumers getting a solution, mobile phone used to be a solution, and then it became just infrastructure where you buy a mobile phone in a store next door. So suddenly telcos, at least outside US, telcos are not offering a solution anymore. They still are in US, right? So you want to come back to where you used to.
I've got 1 minute left. I want to ask you one last question. How do you define a target for an SLA? How do you find that target?
Well, target needs to be definitely agreeable for both sides.
And how do you find the number?
Well, you negotiate.
Okay, but can you find a number? Like, you have to come to me and tell me the first number. What is that number going to be?
Depending on the SLA on what, sometimes you look into the amount of incidents in the past and you kind of try to establish a baseline.
That's fine. Okay, that'll be it for today. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go through a 5-minute deliberation to give you an idea of what they saw, and that's going to be
Can we say one thing?
Sure.
Just to be clear, we're at a disadvantage because we have 10 more minutes of questioning from this point on.
And we didn't have evidence.
And the thing is, we didn't have evidence. And I want to be clear, because right now we all have a really good state, but we have that next 10 minutes is where we get into the depth, which we can't do here. And I just want to point that out. This is the first round to set the context of the questioning. And I have to be clear, because it's really important for the audience, that the next one would be a lot more precision and a lot more rigorous, because we've got now the facts and we see the holes to which to drill to try to suss out the evidence so the candidate can pass.
And the evidence is really important for a couple of things. One,
I'm sorry, I just had to say that.
And it is very important that you say that, because one, when I have a resume, I can understand sort of where this person is coming from, what they've been doing, etc. And then I understand where this project fits in their life cycle. I also understand their their first project, their worst project, and what they consider to be their best project. So I can understand like how they developed and what they think is good, what they think is bad, and where they started from, which is actually very critical. I find I learned so much just from that one document that I can't even tell you. So not having that today is very hard.
Absolutely. So, initial vote.
Initial vote for this?
Pass, fail. Yep.
Fail.
I'm pass.
Fail.
Pass.
So
All
what's the
right.
point of the initial vote?
50-50.
Yeah.
What's the initial
What's
vote?
the
Now there's a
What does it
modified.
mean?
So the initial vote just gives us an idea of how to form the conversation. So we have
It's a
two
throwaway
pass.
vote too.
Yeah.
What's that?
It's a throwaway, it's emotional.
Yeah, it's emotions.
We just put out our emotion.
I liked his shoes. I had a really good connection. I got to get it out, right?
You have to go with the
I got to
emotion.
get it out. But
Doesn't mean anything.
it gives us balance. Now we can negotiate why we think he passed or didn't pass.
In the negotiation, the conversation isn't to convince somebody, it's to make sure that everybody sees the same thing. And then once we have that, then they can make their final vote.
So I'll start the conversation. Regarding business technology strategy, although I see some weaknesses, I think that it's a product of the project exposure. I don't think that we have to have exceptional depth, but at least he understands how to calculate things like ROI, et cetera, and he understands what some of the better metrics or some of the better calculations might be to understand value. I would suggest that he does have some more exposure on the business side, but otherwise I'd be okay on that one.
What about design?
So, I mean, we're just going down the thing. So the concern that I have is, just say the line of questioning continued. The concern was the quality of the presentation was not architecturally based. It was reporting to, like, I'm reporting on a project, which did not provide evidence, which makes me concerned that his communication skill, he's not recognizing peers. And the definite strong in the human dynamics, extremely gifted, and very strong in the business dynamics, but there wasn't the rigor, and we didn't have the 10 minutes to get to the rigor of the architectural profession and craft. In design, I didn't get hardly any evidence in design in terms of actual design that this candidate did. I got around what we did, I did not get what this person did, so I was not able to, with what the time we had, to extract the level of repeatability, predictability, and the actual level of infrastructure knowledge, which we could not drill down to, which I know, Mihal, I know it's there, we just couldn't get there.
What about operations? Did you guys see the IT environment all up?
I think we didn't go into the IT environment
We didn't go
nearly.
into it deep.
We went into the
Yeah.
operations with support.
Yeah.
Very
What
deep.
about quality attributes? Did you see any of that?
Well, he alluded to being in his written documentation, which is really where I would hope to find it. If it wasn't there, then we would start talking about what the systemic qualities are, and when they have conflict, how does he resolve which
Yeah, the
one
trade-offs.
the
Yeah.
trade-offs
Which
and
ones-
things like
yeah.
that. We didn't go down that, but that's where we would have gone in the second round. What we do after the first round is we have these sheets that we don't have with us, that they're downloaded in the pack. If you download the ISA candidate pack, it's all in there. We go through and we identify what we didn't get. I didn't get enough in IT environment. I didn't get enough in design. Finally, he did get to the design ATAM.
Right, right.
You know,
Yeah.
that's,
The traceability.
yeah, it just took us too stinking long to get there, but
He's very clever. This candidate's very clever. He knows how to work an audience.
yes, yes. Did you catch the dynamic?
Did you see
change?
how he was maneuvering us
Yeah,
out of our questions?
exactly.
So the next round, he wouldn't have a chance.
So you know, one thing that was actually really important to mention too is a project that is 5 years old is not necessarily your best option for a review when you come to the board. You really do want to, and I understand the context. This is not, you know, we take that out of this context. If you're going for a board review, you want to use something, you want to use some recent evidence, and you can use some historical evidence, but you do want to have some recent evidence. You want to show that you're a practicing
It's
architect.
relevant.
Yeah, and that
Yes,
gets into
the relevance.
that gets into understanding the roadmaps of where technology is going. We would be asking that question. Where, you know, this is an old project, great. How would you do it today with the technologies available today?
So hopefully
Cloud.
that gave you a
Exactly,
flavor
cloud.
of what it's like. He wouldn't have been in the room to hear all that. And during the 5-minute break, they would have said those very things, and they would have had a plan of attack and come in. Each one would have had a pillar that they were responsible for, and they would drill into those
But
very
it's important
specifically.
that this is Miha's role actually. You start at a level and you build evidence up.
Up.
You don't cut them down.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Exactly.
So what we would be doing is polling evidence. If you could see so many times we're polling, it looks like we're mean and brutal and harsh. We are, but we're polling evidence. We want him to get the certification, and we want to pull it out of him, but we can't give him the evidence. He has to provide the evidence to us, which he does eventually.
And sometimes, you know, we actually acknowledge that he did it. Like, I acknowledge that you gave me, like, wow, that's really what I wanted. It wasn't really about ROI. There was something else that was at play there, and that's what we wanted to see because we're your peers, right? So that's something that we are going to go for that. So remember, when you go into a board review, right, it's not your customer, it's about what other architects want to see, so they understand why you're doing things the way you're doing it.
Yeah. So the last thing, and then we're going to call this one done.
Well, Mike's going to say his.
Yeah, Mike's got to say his
Oh,
piece.
sorry.
Oh, it's just so my overall thought is that so my approach to getting evidence is really I imagine that I've got these 70 glass jars, right, and each one represents a specific thing that I'm looking for. Investment prioritization and planning, for example. And when I find something from him, from his materials, from his presentation, I drop it in there. So I'm looking to go and fill up all these little buckets. So what I had found as an outset is that in human dynamics, it sounded like he had only one tool, and that was the hammer. And so as a result, would have liked to have seen more around conflict negotiation, being able to, from a leadership perspective, I wanted to go down that aisle. On the BTS side, and the business technology strategy, about governance, about regulatory concerns, things like that, around investment prioritization and planning, and IT ops. So I thought he had a good base. He had 2 or 3 jelly beans in every jar, but I think that there was going to be a lot of work to go to fill those up. Yeah, and so.
But the pace picks up. Then the second round picks up. It's moving fast. It's great.
So Miha, give us a couple of minutes.
It was tough to cut a presentation for a cert. That's the first fact. The things that I didn't say exactly, Richard is very much right. You need to tell all the context. You need to tell in the presentation everything that you saw here. Very much what I cut out was the depths of the design. And those 10 minutes that I was missing hurt me a lot. Because if I would listen to the stuff, I re-roll it back in my head, and everything that I dropped because we shortened the presentation.
Let's be clear, so many candidates come in with this level of presentation
Yeah.
Or worse.
and ask to
Yeah,
go
or
longer.
worse. Yeah.
Like, I'm not done.
Correct.
I have so much more that I want to keep repeating.
Correct.
So let's put it clear that that's a really good sign, but that's a good lesson. I mean,
Correct.
I mean, we're doing a mock board, but in the real
I
board, we see a
couldn't,
lot
the
of
second
that.
part is I couldn't refer to my documentation. Documentation needs to be rock solid. And although I faked that, you know, the ROI numbers are there, no, the system, the specific measurables for the quality attributes are there, it's the best part is to actually have the documentation submitted where all of those numbers and all of the pictures and everything is in there. So essentially, even before you walk in front of the board and have your 30 minutes, you already know what's the base is already there.
Well, that makes it easier for us. And the reason I say that is we see it and we validate what he said. A lot of times things appear and they may not actually be genuine. And we'll make sure they're genuine, but it makes it move much faster. I never would have asked a lot of the questions had I had your documentation. I would have validated in one or two questions. And
so I think, and that comes to my second part of the comment. Although we knew that it will be one round of 10 minutes each, those questions were way easier because you wanted to establish that background for questions which you would already know through the documentation. And you would already know maybe through additional 10 minutes of my presentation. I'm surprised how you voted. Because this is a half time with 2/3 of presentation, no documentation. I would vote for me clear fail in this.
Yeah, you failed.
Yeah, but
Right? I mean,
I think that what happens.
this is simulation,
let's-
right?
So now is now how not to do your board.
No.
well, no, I think that the rhythm would establish, if we would go for another 40 minutes, I think that we've all established quite a good rhythm. At the beginning, for example, with Mike, I needed to, every question he asked, and actually also for Andrea, I know Jim and Richard a little bit better, but when Mike asks a question, or Andrea, let's go with Andrea, and then I'm going through my head, what does she want to know? Which pillar, which competency, and you probably heard me when she goes, am I clear enough? I'm going, which pillar, which competency? I have no clue. No, I'm not. Can you?
Well, do you know why though? Because I'm going for synthesis. I'm not looking at a specific pillar. I'm looking for him to synthesize across pillars. And that's one of the differences between a practitioner at like an application developer and an architect. You have to be able to look down, you have to be able to see wide, you have to be able to synthesize across all of the pillars. So you're defining a pillar in isolation doesn't really help you. You have to be able to synthesize across all of them and try to bring an
we
answer
actually will
forward.
ask, and this is through the training, we will ask questions that will cover many subcategories of multiple pillars simultaneously. And we can actually check off 3 or 4.
We did a few of that.
Yeah, I'm good at that one.
So any of them, Sarah, Scott, and Michael Shinazaki, are all certified. If you want to ask any more questions, they've all gone through at least this certification, if not more, and they've all served on review boards. So feel free to ask them. We'll answer all of them.
One last thing is that I don't think the presentation you had really benefited your. I think it was a hard one to go and get the evidence out of to be able to demonstrate. And so when you're looking at picking the case study that you want to use for this, you want to make sure that it lends itself towards that type of behavior. You know, how am I going to be able to demonstrate the business valuation, solution valuation?
All pillars.
Yeah,
I got
how are we
30
going
minutes.
in 30 minutes?
I think it's just, I wanted to raise a couple of things just very quickly, sorry. The one is, there's this mentoring process that goes on. And so a lot of these things, when you start putting together presentations and documentation, you have a mentor that's going to give you some guidance on that.
Absolutely.
You're not going to be lost in the wilderness. The other thing is, when it comes to the bar, you know, none of you guys addressed the bar that needs to be met. It's not that people need to be gods of architecture to pass this thing, right?
Right.
There is a bar, and it's kind of interesting to hear Richard and Mike talk about Miha's human dynamics skills from 2 different extremes. Richard's like saying, wow, and Mike's like, not so
I
much.
like cameras though.
then I'm a
And
consultant.
so, somewhere along in that deliberation, they're going to have a discussion about, does he meet the bar for human dynamics in that case?
And the bar isn't the other person that went through the certification, and it's not them.
Yeah.
It is a straw man, and we said, this is the bar, and that's part of their training is we make sure that they know what they're looking for and nothing more, and the moderator makes sure that they remember that.
And if we disagree, we actually read the definition and review, which I like. Yeah.
Anyone have anything they want to ask real quick?
Why do you ask an architect about ROI of the project? What was it?
So it's really important that you understand the business, and that you can attach the business value, the strategy, and understand why are they doing something. A lot of times, I think that it's very easy, especially in consulting, to end up on projects but not have all of the picture that happened before. Like maybe there's a pre-sales group or something to that effect. And you may not know everything there that is why they're doing it. For example, it wasn't about ROI here. I was really trying to find, like personally me, I was trying to find out what was the driving factor there. Because I felt like something was missing. And it wasn't ROI. They were actually trying to prevent being split up. And so that's where we started going down.
So
You go.
Let me add one piece. What she's talking about is the business of the business.
Yes.
Their real business was not to be split up.
Yes.
If an architect at the level that we're certifying doesn't know that, they're not an architect for this certification.
In the
If they
last-
can't speak the language of the business at a CXO level, we didn't have time to do the CEO, which is the fun part. Because we went to CIO just to cover that. But we hit CTO and CEO, because you think the CEO cares what the CIO cares about? Not at all. So the issue is at the level of the certification of the bar, speaking the language of the business and validating that the CIO is telling the truth and that you can balance the C layer and know and vet truth, because most of them might not be telling the truth. You've got to know, because your architecture is liable.
And just to
And
make-
your whole career, whether you're liable or not, rests on your liability as a practicing certified architect. And the last thing,
Now-
the certification,
you guys,
the
we've gotta
certification
move on.
implies that.
Yeah, we've got to move. But I think that the answer you were looking for is, it isn't we take requirements and push them and deliver against them. We validate requirements against business needs. That's what an architect does.
Okay,
So-
thank you all.
Okay, Scott?